Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 2025 Funds in Focus budget event. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Kimberly Overholt, Communications and Engagement Manager for the City of Loveland. Want to let you know that we are so appreciative that you're here today. We had almost 150 people sign up for the online portion of this event, so this is a topic that's important to our community. Thank you for being here tonight. I want to introduce those that are involved with tonight's event. First, we've got Logan Garcia. He's running the online event and will be helping folks with their questions as they enter them into the chat tonight. We've got some claps there. We've got Clara Schultz behind the camera downstairs. We're going to be rebroadcasting this on lovegov.org/TV and on our broadcast television station. So if you want to access a recording, tomorrow afternoon is the best time to start accessing that rebroadcast on lovegov.org/TV. We have Nicole Yost, Communications and Engagement Director. She's going to be moderating the questions with Brian tonight. If you're in person, you've got a sheet of paper. That is so that while you're listening, if a question comes up, or maybe you came to this event with a question in mind, write it down on that piece of paper. Once the presentation's done, we'll collect that and we'll work through the questions and answers that way. If you're joining us virtually on the Zoom, you'll enter your questions on the chat. Logan will be collecting those and we'll be handling those that way. We also have with us our Chief Financial Officer and Budget Expert, Brian Waldiz. We've also got our Acting Public Works Director, Jody Lessman, here. As a reminder, this event is going until 6:30. We've got a hard stop at 6:30. I also want to paint a picture of what to expect if you've got additional questions that haven't been answered. The reason that we collected your email address at the entrance, and we also ask for it on your questions, is if for some reason we don't get to a question or we don't have an immediate answer for you, we can work to answer those questions next week. And so we'll be emailing those who were in attendance with that finality. So hopefully knowing that helps. Please write your email addresses legibly. This is the agenda for tonight. This is what you're going to learn while you're here. Thank you again for attending. So I want to go over a few ground rules for the event tonight. Just let you know what to expect, how the meeting's going to be operating, so that there's no surprises. Our goal with this event is to provide you with clear and succinct information. We want to make sure that we're sharing information about our city budget with you. We want to also make sure that we can answer questions because we know that our community has a lot of those questions. We did this last year, and because of the success of the event last year, we saw the need to do it again this year. And we're appreciative for everybody who's attended in the past. And I see a lot of new faces in the crowd today, and I saw a lot of new names registered for this event, so it's definitely a topic that the community cares about, and we appreciate that. The way that we're going to accomplish this goal is this event is one of those ways. We also do ongoing communication through our website, on our social media platforms, through our broadcast television station, and of course we've always got our public meetings as well. For this event, we want to make sure that we're providing a safe space for everybody, and that's why we've got those question forms down. Not everybody wants to speak in public, and sometimes it's best to be able to think through your questions so that we can answer them to the level that is appreciative of where you're at. Thank you so much for doing that. I mentioned already that our meeting will end promptly at 6:30, and if we run out of time, we're going to get to those questions next week. Here are some general event ground rules. We're going to try to be respectful of everybody's time. Your time is very valuable, so thank you again for coming. We've got an hour to cover 15 slides and run through the information. If you didn't get a chance, there were flyers on the table outside. On your way out, feel free to grab those. Some of those are in tonight's presentation, but some of those are not, and they provide insight into our budget as well. Now I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who, as our Chief Financial Officer, is going to give you some information.
Thank you, Kim. I'm Brian Waldes, your Chief Financial Officer. Thank you so much for coming tonight. It's always good to see people coming, wanting to learn about their government, what we provide for you, how we provide it, and also to answer your questions a little later on in the evening. So, as Kim just said, our goal is to provide clear, succinct information to you so you can get a better understanding of how we provide the services that we provide, where we get the funding, and how our different funds are organized. And that can help sometimes alleviate some confusion about how our different funds work and how they are funded. So, what we'll start with is to explain that for about 70 years, City of Loveland has strove to be a full-service city. What do we mean by a full-service city? We mean a city that provides those basic functions that we come to expect, like clean water, electricity, public safety, passable roads, plowing the roads in winter, services of that nature, but also a lot of the services that inform the fabric of what Loveland is. A lot of the things that make Loveland Loveland, like libraries, festivals, our arts and culture department, right? Like the museum and the Rialto. We also have our wonderful library. So we provide not only those life and limb or public safety and transportation services, we also provide what we call our quality of life services, and that's what makes us a full-service city. And a lot of those services that Lovelanders come to love and enjoy that do inform that fabric are provided by the general fund. Okay, the general fund provides services, everything from public safety, so your police and fire, to transportation, which includes transit, which is buses, bus services, and also your roads. General fund also provides for a lot of those other services that I was just mentioning, like the library, arts and culture. Okay, it provides those full service category services as well. It's important to note, where does the general fund get its funding? Primarily from taxes. Okay, this is kind of what you think of as where your sales tax goes. It goes to the general fund. And those sales tax dollars primarily are used to provide all those different services. So it's always a balancing act in this general fund between public safety and the services that make Loveland Loveland. As I mentioned, it's sales tax. It's a primary source for the general fund. Sales tax is the largest tax revenue source in the general fund. Your next largest revenue source in the general fund is property tax. And it is less, much less, than half of sales tax. Then after that, you have your use tax and a couple other categories, and then you'll have your fees for service. So that's really kind of your revenue portfolio in your general fund. But your primary revenue source in your general fund, as it is for almost all municipalities in the state, is sales tax. So that's very important to remember. That sales tax funds your general fund, but we have other categories of funds that provide other services that are not funded by taxes. So on our next slide, thank you, these are what we call our dedicated funds. So dedicated funds serve some of those needs I mentioned at the beginning, like clean water, electricity. Okay, those are what we call our utility funds. They are not funded by taxes. They are funded by fees for service. And there's a really good logic to this. You don't want your very basic services, clean water, really being tied to the vagaries of politics or elections or things that might change like they can change in the general fund. So that is very much a fee-for-service unit in the city, very much a business. So that explains, how your utilities are funded. Power, Pulse is a utility fund, and so is our power fund and water, I think I already mentioned. What's very important to notice, and actually, and forgive me, but on the next slide, there we go. We'll show a lot of those services that are operated very much like a business. These are your fee-for-service type funds and programs. And what's important to remember is they don't crosstalk, okay? As a rule, your general fund does not share revenues or expenses with your utility funds and vice versa. They're separated. So when we see things like to kind of talk about, what's happening lately, sometimes there can be some confusion when, and we'll get to a little bit on this a little more later, our general fund's on the struggle bus right now. It's having some revenue issues. How can we be going out and buying the Cascade building, right, for our water and power departments? That's because those are separate funds, and they operate on fees for service. Now, there are exceptions to just about every rule in accounting. There are transactions that go back and forth between the general fund and your utility funds, but you can't fund your general fund with water fees. And just like you can't fund your water operations with taxes, that's prohibited by law. And if you really think about it, it should be, right? We keep these things in separate buckets so that we're guaranteed no matter what happens in elections or with taxes or the economy, we can still provide those basic services because they operate off their own fees and are separate from those other funds. So it's a very important concept to keep in mind. Again, when you see things like construction projects happening, yet we are having budget problems in our general fund, the two can happen at the same time because those are other funds doing that work. So those are important things to keep in mind when thinking about the city as a whole. So as we move on to our next slide, this is the proportion of what the city does in terms of our fund balance. This does not equate to money in the bank. This is your net fund balance. But what we're trying to show here is, like I just talked about, you have these different categories of funds. You have your general fund, which is, again, funded by your taxes. Then you have your utility funds, which run very much on fees. And we also have special revenue funds, which have dedicated tax sources like your lottery money when it's given to the city. That's also a special fund that can't crosstalk with the general fund. So there are a few categories there. But this represents the fund balance in all our other funds. So utility funds, special projects funds, and things like that. This green sliver is your general fund. These two pie pieces make up your general fund. So you can see the general fund is actually a relatively small portion of what we do. The water and power funds have much bigger budgets than the general fund because they're very much construction companies, right? They have, I don't know how many miles, but a lot of miles of pipes and transmission lines to maintain. So they're a major business. So by dollar volume, the majority of what we do are these utilities, and they have most of our fund balance. And again, they're not impacted by our latest changes to sales tax and things of that nature. They operate on fees. So they've got their challenges with inflation and the same challenges everybody else has, but they're not as challenged as the general fund. So that's what you can see here is the proportion of what we have here in the city. And we take this one step further. In the general fund, that's a pretty good pie slice. It's about a $20 million slice of pie. Did I do the math right? Yes, just over a $20 million slice of pie. But most of that is reserved either for emergencies or is required to be reserved by law. So after we have our reserves, and I'll explain very quickly, for example, we have $19 million in reserves. The vast majority of that is the council's emergency, or I should say contingency fund, or emergency reserve. The last time we used it was for the flood in 2013. That fund is there so that if there is an emergency, the City of Loveland can help its residents the next day. Okay, the federal government may or may not be there to help you in the future. But even when they are there, I'll give you a little anecdote. About 18 months ago, we got our last check settling up the flood. That's how long it takes to get your money back. Okay, so it behooves you to have a very sizable reserve there for those purposes, for when those kinds of incidents happen, because here, especially here on the Front Range with all our natural beauty, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So we keep this fund, and that is the best practice. We keep about 2 months supply there in our general fund expenses. So that's a standard practice. Generally, municipalities keep between 2 and 3 months of general fund expenditures reserved. So what we're showing you here is, yes, this is how $228 million gets down to about $1.5 million very quickly when you're talking about the general fund. This is, again, an area where it's pretty easy to get confused. Okay, I do this every day. I can still get confused. But people can say to you, hey, the city has $200 million. They're fine. Yes, that's a true statement. We have over $200 million. But you now know how that's organized, how it's set up. The general fund doesn't have $200 million. When you talk about your general fund, it's a very different conversation than these other components of the city. So, since I mentioned the general fund, on the next slide, what we want to show here is our primary funding sources for the general fund and how they fit in the context of our neighborhood here and how they fit in the context of a full-service city. Okay, a city that is trying to use its general fund not just for life and limb and public safety, but to also provide those full-service city services that I discussed. What you're looking at here is a sales tax comparison chart. The circles are to scale, and what they are showing is your relative sales tax rates here with our friends and neighbors in our corner of the state, right, our northern Front Range. As you can see in the blue box on the left there, Loveland's 3% sales tax rate was established in 1984, has not been increased since then. So 1984, they tell me that's like 2 generations, which scares me because I can remember 1984. But that, for context, tells you, okay, that sales tax rate has been in place for quite a while. Then when you look around at our friends and neighbors here, you'll see we have the lowest rate, especially when you consider that little red and white symbol that's there that indicates we do not tax food for home consumption. That was a result of 300 being approved in 2023. We're all familiar with that, right? So it is Loveland and Wellington have the same sales tax model. Now, no aspersions on our friends in Wellington. It's a great town, but it does not have the same service levels that Loveland does, and that Loveland has had for 70 years. So that is maybe your first indicator that, okay, that's going to be a challenge, is to maintain those service levels when, again, you've got a sales tax base, because that is your primary source of general fund funding at that level. We were struggling to maintain our service portfolio at the 3% level, and when we made that change with 300, it's forced us to reduce our service levels to match that new income level, because that change resulted in a $10.4 million reduction in sales tax revenue just in 2024, and that's going to happen every year. So that's why you've heard about some of those service reductions. When we look at our next revenue source, our next largest revenue source for the general fund, it's property tax. Same story here. The circles are relative. You can see outside of, I think it's Timnath and Wellington, we also have the lowest property tax rate. Our property tax, I believe, was put in place in 1992, 9.564. It's not the lowest in our region, but it's pretty close to it. So when you combine these two factors and you look at, okay, what does that mean for your general fund? What we have here is a slide comparing what we call revenue models. What we have is a home, kind of a hypothetical citizen, right? A home at $425,000 assessed value for property tax. Then you have $13,000 in kind of walk around spending, okay, retail spending, and $4,600 on groceries. Now this is just an example, but we got these numbers from some literature to try to keep it close, but it's just meant as an example. So if you apply your sales tax rates, your property tax rates, and the fact that Loveland does not tax food, Loveland comes out in this hypothetical example here, dead last in revenue received for those activities in the city. And what this is meant to show is it puts you in a challenging spot when you're trying to maintain that full service level, that full service city level of service that we have been since 1984 with the same tax rate, and then the tax rate was lowered. It's just made it too hard for us to stay at that same level, and we had to lower it to match what the new revenue amount is.
Yes. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Jody Lessman, your Acting Public Works Director. I'm going to talk a little bit about capital projects, and first wanted to explain what those are. Those are large dollar projects that maintain, replace, or improve our infrastructure. So what I'm going to explain to you tonight is that our needs outpace our funding. In 2025, Public Works had the highest budget cuts of the city. We lost $6.8 million out of our capital funds. These are the funds that maintain our facilities and our streets and traffic signals. What does that mean? emergency repair versus planned maintenance. Basically, at our facilities, we are outrun to failure. So instead of replacing something, well ahead of its extended life, we're replacing it once it fails. So HVAC systems, sprinkler systems, those kinds of things. Our current capital budget for this year is $11.5 million. And I've been told by Brian I can share this. Our draft budget next year is, our capital budget is 4.5. So you can see that we are going downward in that trend and cannot keep up with the needs. Our facilities, we've identified there's $2.5 million in critical projects right now. These include things like our library sprinkler system, the HVAC replacement at the museum and the Chilson. We need a second CNG, compressed natural gas compressor for our fuel island that helps with the CNG vehicles that we have. So we've identified another $8 million in priority projects. Priority 2 and 3 projects. These are projects that aren't necessarily critical, not run to failure. But again, with all of our facility projects, this is not a if, but when. This is the same thing that you have when you're replacing the oil in your vehicle. You have to do, filters, those kinds of things. When you're replacing the roof on your house, you paint, those kinds of things. This is the same thing for our city facilities. Increased downtime. So when we order things, this isn't going to Home Depot or Lowe's. These are large projects. These HVAC systems we have to order, so it takes longer. So there is the increase for downtime in our facilities. There's also higher costs. Things don't get cheaper. Materials don't get cheaper in the future. So the longer we put things off, the more expensive they become. One of the things I want to mention too is we do have an O&M budget in facilities of $700,000. That covers 1 million square feet of buildings. So that's less than $1 square foot that we have to maintain our city facilities. What that O&M does, it's a little bit different than the capital, is it's used for small repairs like replacing sinks, toilets, electrical, small things that just have wear and tear on them over time. So when switch pace a little bit and talk about transportation. In our transportation, we've identified $7 million that we need in critical projects. These are safety projects. Some of them are the US 34 sidewalk connectivity, improvements to the 287 and 402 intersection. The one that we've really got that is critical for us that we're looking at is the US 34 and 287 intersections. I'm sure if you've driven through those, you know that those are tight and well undersized. That alone is a $15 million project. We are doing our very best to obtain grant funding. Our team does a great job at seeking funding from the state, from federal. We've also have a CDOT as a partner in this, but we still need $3 million to complete the project because that is the 20% match. And most of our state and federal grants require a 20% match on our transportation grant funds. So by deferring these projects, we're deferring safety on our roads and safety in our traffic signals. Those are the projects that we can't put out. They're large dollar items. And we do have a higher risk of the building closures, of impacts to our community. Yes, please. So in the capital improvement project area, because of the large dollar amount, we do have street maintenance rehabilitation program, or SMRP. We have 396 miles of roads. This program is what funds the maintenance of those roads. So this is the chip seal, the mill and overlay, the large pavement projects that you see. This is an $11 million program. We rely on $3 million from the general fund. The rest of this program is funded through the highway user tax fee, which is your gas tax, the HUTF, and the FASTER funding, which is what you pay on your license plate renewal registration. There is a small transportation fee that you pay on the city utility bill. These all help contribute to that $11 million program. We are not keeping up with the pace of inflation. Asphalt and concrete are getting more expensive, and the condition of our roads is on a downward trend. So what we try to do, this graph shows that we try very hard to keep our roads in the good to fair categories. You can see that, for every dollar of rehabilitation, it's cheaper if we keep them that way and we're maintaining them. When they get down into that very poor, serious, or failed, it's a full reconstruct. Once a street has failed, once it's gotten to the point that it is cracking and severely failing, you can't just go and chip seal it and bring it back to a good or fair condition. You have to redo the whole thing, and that means pulling it completely down to the base and redoing it, and that gets very costly. And you can see that from our graph. So we try to stay out of that, but we are on a downward trend and seeing that we aren't able to do as many roads on an annual basis as we have in the past.
All right. Thank you both for that information. We have a little bit more than 30 minutes to answer questions from the public. If you are joining us online, just a reminder to please add your questions to the chat. If you are joining us in person, Kim will come around and collect questions that are ready. Please make sure you provide your contact information, because if we run out of time to answer questions live tonight, we will be using those emails to send answers to some of the questions that we receive next week, so that we can make sure we are addressing all of your questions. So as Kim's collecting the ones in, two other notes, I guess. The first is, if we have in-person and a lot of in-person and online questions, I'm going to flip-flop between in-person and online. If somebody also has asked a similar question, I might bunch a few questions together if I'm noticing a theme. That way, just to maximize our time a little bit better. So I just wanted to preface with that. So the first question that we've received is maybe more for Brian, and Jody, if you can pitch in if needed. So last year, there was a prioritization and methodology that was established to help prioritize general fund spending. Could you talk a little bit about what that methodology and prioritization was?
Yeah, of course. As I talked about during my presentation, we had that revenue decrease in our general fund. When we heard about ballot 300, being placed on the ballot in 2023, we were able to quantify pretty accurately what the impacts would be and start to anticipate what we would need to do in 2024 and then also in the years after, if that measure should pass. And as we all know, it did pass, substantially. So what we did in 2024 is go through in 2023 for 2024 is we went through a prioritization exercise because we were going to have to reduce some services. Taking over $10 million out of that general fund every year, as you can see, that already had the lowest funding model in the region. Although, to be clear, before we removed the tax on food, we were only a couple of rungs up on that chart, as you'll recall. We're right now we're at the bottom. We were above Berthoud, I believe. So what we had to do was go through an exercise and say, okay, what services can we reduce responsibly, understanding those are going to be permanent reductions. That this isn't a recession or a pandemic or anything where you can say, okay, we'll hold vacancies open, we won't do raises, and we won't do education for staff, professional training. We'll hold off on those for a couple of years till things turn around. This is what we call a permanent recession, right? That revenue source is never coming back. So we can't do things like tell people, okay, you're never getting a raise or you're never going to get any training. We have to look at reducing service levels. So that's what was so challenging about that exercise. And what we came up with was very much kind of a pyramid of needs, if you will. And at the base of that pyramid, we put public safety. We put roads. We put police and fire. And then from there, we tried to protect those from cuts as much as we could, understanding everybody got some cuts. Every department had reduced funding levels. We did spread it around to every department, but we tried to protect those departments as much as we could. And then as you went up the pyramid, right, as it gets smaller, we had to look at those, quality of life, full service city type services. And that, unfortunately, is where a lot of the cuts fell. Because as much as we all love the library, as much as we love our arts and culture, right, we had to make those difficult decisions. And so we have to fund police over the Rialto. Okay, so we had to reduce those services. We didn't have to cancel them altogether, but they had to be reduced. And I know there's a lot of talk out there about, oh, that was fun, or the city staff liked to do it to punish people for what happened. None of that is true. None of that was fun, and none of that was taken lightly. Okay, those are our friends and our coworkers, Lovelanders. That was a very difficult exercise, but it was 100% necessary because of the reduction to revenue. And as awful as it was, and as nobody likes it, it was successful. We got through 2024 without having to dip into that contingency fund balance. We had worked with council very closely on those priorities, and we also took from them strategic direction. And one thing they told us was, do not go into the emergency reserve, because that is too important. Okay, you have to, and plus, again, this is permanent. We couldn't dip into the emergency reserve and say, that's okay, we'll get it back next year, because again, that reduction is permanent. So it was a very difficult exercise, and I'm very proud of the results. It was not fun in any sense of the word, but it was successful. And your general fund now, the analogy I like to use is your general fund is stable. Like if you went to the hospital and you asked about your friend and they said, your friend's stable. All right, that's not great news, but it's not terrible. All right, the general fund is not sinking. Okay, we're able to hold it steady. As Jody has explained, we have tremendous infrastructure needs that are being put on the back burner, but hopefully we can address some of those. But that process got us to a place where we think it was done logically, fairly, and in a successful way, in the sense that the general fund is stable.
Thank you, Brian. Next question comes from Sarah online. So it is the capital improvement projects are funded by the general fund, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, looking for why capital projects lost funding, but I think in the methodology that was addressed. So thanks, Sarah. All right, so we're going to go to our next in-person question. This comes from Mike Clayton. Probably for you, Brian, the budget process allows for total expenditures in the general fund to exceed its revenue, with the excess paid out of the general fund reserves. When will the general fund reserves be depleted, and what happens after that? If you want to read it, just to make sure.
That's a great question, Mike, and that's what we were seeking to avoid, right? We always hear the term deficit spending and balanced budget. It's very similar to your personal finances, right? If you have $1,000 in the bank, then you can spend $1,000 more than you earn in that year, let's say, right? So the general fund does have reserves, but as you saw, the vast majority of that bank account or reserves is, well, reserved, right? The contingency reserve, we have a Tabor reserve in there and some other smaller reserves, and we only have that roughly $1.5 million of unassigned fund balance. So yes, if your revenue, or I should say if your expenses exceed your revenues in any particular year, you're going to dip into your savings, into your fund balance to that extent. But again, in 2024, we didn't have to do that, and we've been planning to avoid that as much as possible because we don't have any reserves to use.
Thank you. We have two questions, one online, one in person, that are similar. So I'm going to try to address those together. This is to address Bill's question online and Carrie's question in person. How much sales tax revenue has Loveland given away through incentives to businesses? Do we know what the value of this was in 2024? Bill's question, slightly different, is to what degree has the tax abatements to developers contributed to the budget shortfalls?
Those are great questions. We have kind of two categories of partnerships with developers or businesses. We have our incentive deals, which would be kind of sales tax sharebacks with your coffee shops or your restaurants or businesses of that nature. And then we also have our biggest single partnership is the Centerra URA. I'm sure you've all heard of that, where a good portion, about 40% of the sales tax and all of the property tax from that development is shared back with the developer to pay for public improvements, the roads, the sidewalks, and all of the other public amenities in Centerra. So it is not for developer profit or for any of the vertical construction. It's just for the public assets that the city will inherit at the end of the agreement, at the end of the term, which is in 2029. So I don't know the value of all the, the smaller business incentive agreements. I can say that in Centerra North, the split right now is Centerra generates about $9 million total a year in tax revenue. The vast majority of that is from sales tax, and the rest is from property tax. And I'm going to, the property tax I think is just over $1 million, I want to say. And the URA retains all that property tax. The city gets, of our 3%, we get 1.75 of the sales tax, and the URA gets 1.25. So where that lands is, out of that $9 million total that comes in, we basically split it with the URA. The city receives $4.5 million in revenue every year from that. It's been going up. It wasn't that when the project started, of course, but that's the level we're at now. We basically split the tax revenue while the developer is paying off the debt for constructing the roads and all the other public infrastructure that will be deeded over to the city as part of the agreement. So right now, it's kind of we're doing kind of an even split out there, and that $4.5 million is what the city uses to provide services to that area. So that's the big enchilada. That's Centerra. And the other smaller deals, the sales tax sharebacks and things, I do not have that off the top of my head.
Thanks, Brian. So quick, just housekeeping item. So some of the questions are asking for very specific data that we might not have today. So if we aren't able to, we'll make a note of that for how we can address some of those when we email everyone back next week. Next question is from Ashley online, and this is a question with enterprise funds. I saw water and golf were on there. Why not move things from the general fund to enterprise funds? For example, the water department sponsors the swim beach and throws up some informational signs. The fireworks show moves to the golf course, etc.
Well, that's a great question and a great kind of out of the box, problem-solving idea, but you can't really do that. You're not going to be able to. Your enterprise status is a protected status under Tabor. So if you are an enterprise like our water fund is, and you are, again, providing those services based on fees, you get a lot of advantages over governmental type functions. You can issue debt without an election, and there are other things. You're not held to the revenue limitations of Tabor. So there are a lot of benefits to being an enterprise fund. But in order to get those benefits, to kind of get out from under Tabor, you've got to follow a lot of rules. And among those rules would be what you're spending the money on is appropriate. So the water fund spending its fee revenue on maintaining the system and obviously paying staff and things of that nature, appropriate. The water fund providing for a fireworks show a year after the general fund revenue went down is not something I would support, because again, that's not a proper enterprise function. And again, sponsoring the swim beach, those aren't really enterprise functions, unless there was some tie-in, where it was like a swim beach where you learned about maintaining water systems or something. But that would be a stretch, you see what I'm saying. So great idea, but we talked about the separation of funds at the very beginning. It's a very important concept to remember, and no, I can't take money from the water fund and do the fireworks.
Thank you. Our next question is in person from Ginny Crawford. So it is, are there plans to refill the Foot Lagoon? And maybe, Jody, we can have you address this one.
Yes, those funds were appropriated this spring, and we are working through the contracting process and should have construction on that soon, and it will be full, hopefully, this fall.
Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Eric Rosenberg online. Question is, this might be a question we answer next week, but how much did the red light cameras cost at First and Taft if we're in such a crisis? And what about the black dome lights on nearly every intersection?
Well, I cannot say off the top of my head the exact cost of the red light cameras, but it's important to remember a few things. One, the red light cameras do come with a revenue model, okay, even though that is not the objective. The objective is public safety. The best result for us would be if the cameras were there and nobody blew the light. That's what we're after, but that's not reality. That's why the cameras are there. So, in research that the police department did, there's a reasonable expectation that the fines generated by the cameras will will cover the cost of the camera. Yes, we're in a budget crisis, but again, like we talked about, one of the areas that was as protected as it could be was public safety, was police. So they do have a little bit more ability to introduce new programming. That's one of them. However, in this case, it came with a revenue model that we're fairly confident will be break even because people blow lights. And I don't know what those black dome lights are. I mean, I can't picture them.
Well, I don't know the cost, but it's part of our adaptive signal program, and that's how our signals react to traffic. So they're watching the traffic that comes in, and that's when they turn based on the volumes. So that's what they're used for.
Thank you. We have another question online that is somewhat similar, so if there's anything else to add, let me know. It's a slight difference, but police has this comes from Frank, and I can't pronounce your last name, so I apologize, but Frank K. Police has been our largest general fund expense for years. Can't we use technology to get more bang for our buck? For instance, more traffic cameras to cite violations and create more revenue per officer. Not sure if you had anything else to add there.
Automated police officers.
All right, thanks, Frank. All right, our next question in person is from Steve McLaughlin. I think I got that right. Property taxes. Exactly how much money was collected in 2020 and 2024?
In 2020?
Yes, 2020 and 2024.
Just the 2 years.
Yes.
What was property tax?
Yes.
Very specific question.
Yeah, we'll get back to them.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. 2024 was about in the 16 million range for property tax, but as we all know, we had the big reassessment, right, that everybody got from the county, by the way, not from the city. The county performs that function because this is another one of those things. I'm glad we got this question. 2020, I'll have to get back to you. I wasn't here yet. What's important to note is that the county levies property, I should say, the county does the assessment for property tax. It wasn't the city that gave you that big increase in your property tax bill. Not only that, but a relatively small portion of your property tax bill comes to the City of Loveland. The majority of it goes to the county and to the school district. And that's appropriate. That's exactly how the funding models work all throughout the state. That's totally normal. School districts are property tax. Counties are primarily property tax in terms of their revenue sources. Then when you get to the municipal level, it's primarily sales tax, like we talked about, and a smaller portion of property tax. So I know there's also been some discussion or confusion around, hey, there was this huge reassessment, the city's getting all this money, the city raised property tax. It's just not, it's not the case. So yes, the city did see an increase in property tax, but remember, our sales tax is in the $58 million range, and our property tax is about $16.5 million, just to put that in perspective. So great question, very specific.
Thank you. All right, next question is from online, Mike Straker. And I think I can maybe take this one. What were the major cuts made due to the drop in sales tax, and how were those cuts determined and prioritized? Brian, I think you addressed the methodology and prioritization. One of the things we haven't quite mentioned yet is last December, we created a web page on lovegov.org, the city's web page, lovegov.org/2025 service changes. So we have listed out on that page the methodology that Brian mentioned, but we do also list out where the cuts were. That includes some of the major cuts, which I think Brian mentioned were some of our more public-facing services. But if there's anything else you want to add, Brian, let me know.
Well, we had a combination of reductions in 2024. We had a lot of capital reductions, as Jody talked about. We're still trying to catch up from those because our challenge in 2024 was to not, as council had asked us, to not use fund balance, but to get through that year and then create a 2025 budget that would be the model for permanent service, providing services permanently, 2025 and thereafter. So, yeah, we've had cuts all across the board, but that's how we stabilize the general fund.
Thank you. All right, next question from online, Daniel Gucciardo. I apologize if I butchered your name. What plans are there to reverse the downward trend in budget?
Well, to be clear, we don't really have a downward trend. We took a hit, right? We reduced our sales tax base. So that reduced our sales tax by $10.4 million in 1 year. Well, now you're going to go up from there, right? Now you're kind of at this new level. You used to go like this, and now you're going like this, just at a lower level. So we don't have a downward trend. We had a permanent reduction to our sales tax model. So what we've done now is, like I've mentioned, stabilize the general fund. Unfortunately, reduce service levels to the extent that was required, so that we wouldn't spend more than we were taking in. And the plan now is to operate on that basis going forward, to try to help Jody and our friends in Public Works get that CIP plan caught back up, because that's no joke what we're looking at there. My office leaks when it rains. Okay, it's time to get to that roof, but we can't. We have other priorities. So one day something big is going to happen, and then it's going to be that much more expensive. So those are the things we're dealing with now, is how do we take this revenue model that you saw is the lowest one in the region and try to keep up with all of our assets and all of the asset replacement and the roads and public safety and things like that. So we don't have a downward trend. We're stable now. But the challenge is to see how we can get a little bit caught up in some of those CIP projects and other areas.
Thank you. Next question. Mark Pugh online asks, please address the effect Tabor has on the city's budget.
Oh, Tabor. Well, Tabor, as you all know, is a constitutional amendment to the Colorado State Constitution, voted in, I think, in 1992. And it has, it's a piece of work. It's very wide-ranging. It has a lot of very impactful provisions in it, a lot of confusing provisions in it. And how does it affect the city? Well, what Tabor does, basically, amongst a lot of other things, is say that, and the main provision that would impact the city is that your revenue every year can only grow to the extent that you've had population growth and inflation. So it's basically a formula. You combine revenue growth and inflation, and if your let's say that comes out to 4% and your revenue grew 6%, then you owe a 2% refund to your taxpayers. Now, just to point out how confusing Tabor can be, what's a taxpayer? Well, it doesn't define a taxpayer. Is that someone who owns property in your city? Is that someone who passed through and paid sales tax? So, and what's a refund? Doesn't really say what a refund is. Is a refund a check in the mail? Is a refund a reduced rate going forward? I've heard an example of where a refund became every citizen gets a free day at the rec center, because it would have cost more to get every citizen the $3 that particular municipality owed than the $3 itself. So that's called your really kind of your revenue provision of Tabor. Now, the City of Loveland is separated from Tabor in that area. So we do not have the revenue limiting formula here. Okay, instead, if we do go over that formula, we reserve that money for public projects, for public safety and transportation capital projects. So we are separated from the most onerous provision of Tabor, and we have been since like 1994, I believe. We've had several elections to maintain that status as separated from Tabor. But Tabor still does have a lot of impacts on the city, like having to issue debt for, having to have elections for general obligation debt and other forms of debt in the general fund. And then also, one of the other provisions of Tabor is the debt one, plus the provision that, I do this every day. Elections for taxes and, oh my God, no multi-year obligations. Every contract you enter into as a Colorado government has to have a provision in there that we can back out of this any year for non-appropriation. So those are your two main impacts in the general fund that we are still held to.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left and slightly more than 10 questions. Yeah. So I'll ask an online one, and then we'll get to your question. Thank you. Deborah Sprague online asks, can you provide data on growth in Loveland and how the increase in housing being built all over Loveland could benefit through property taxes, and are developers paying appropriately for increased infrastructure?
I'm sorry, I don't really know how to answer that one. You know, are developers paying appropriately for infrastructure? Yeah, that'd be a tough one for me to answer. It's kind of a wide-ranging question. Yeah, I have to get back to you on that one.
I just broke my microphone. So I just broke the button, so it's going to have to stay on the rest of the time.
This is kind of his priority, but it can be answered via email.
Okay. Oh, great. All right, so Troy Daniels asks, is infrastructure funded by URAs and metro districts kept to a standard, and what is the life expectancy of roads before they are turned over to the city? I don't know if Jody wants, but it might, in case I butchered that.
Well, I can answer that first part. The Metro District mechanism and the URA mechanism are primarily in place to build public infrastructure. That's what those entitlements are required to provide. So if you're a developer and you're doing a Metro District, you are entitled to levy a property tax in that area, in that Metro District. That property tax revenue has to go for the roads, the parks, the trails, the public infrastructure aspects of your project. Same for a URA. Those entitlements that allow you to either share back revenue from the project, like we do with Centerra and a few other URAs in the city, that money has to be used for public benefit. So that speaks to this question and how infrastructure is funded by those two mechanisms. Again, that's the primary purpose of what a Metro District or URA is.
So I can tell you that there is a standard. We have Lucas, it's Larimer County Urban Street Standards. That is shared with Larimer County, Fort Collins, and Loveland. We have a document, and all of our roads, when they're new, are built to those standards. So whether they're in a Metro District or a URA, they have to abide by those standards, and they have to be built to those levels. As far as the life expectancy of a road, I would be estimating, but around 20 to 25 years, if with average maintenance, they're in good shape. We have done some of the road maintenance in McWhinney just recently, and they are, they were towards the end of their life, and we did those because they are city roads.
Thank you. Another in-person question. Mike Clayton? Okay, yes. So I've got three. Which one was a priority? Talked about them? Okay. So first question is $627 per resident in taxes equates to around $50 million. Government activities cost a lot more, $166 million. Where does this money come from? It's number one.
So are we multiplying 627 by 80,000? Yeah, that's not counting visitors. Do you agree? You agree that's not counting visitors, right? So, yeah, so that question really doesn't. Right. That's another 620 per. Oh, yeah, no, and that also wasn't meant to be 627 per resident. That was just kind of a hypothetical example.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk offline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I just want to
Can I read
be.
the second one?
Well, I have a ton of other
Okay,
questions,
sure,
so I was
sorry.
trying to be a little bit more equitable. I was trying to be a little bit more equitable so we can hear from more people. So online, Donna Thompson says, is it possible to put a food sales tax back on the ballot in 25 or 26?
Oh, yes. There's two ways that tax questions can get on the ballot. One is a referral, and that's what we had we had the sales tax increase on the ballot in 2024. And what a referral means is that the council does it. So if a council decides to put something on the ballot, that is a referred question. In the case of 300, that was done by citizens, so that's what's called an initiated ballot. Initiative, thank you, a ballot initiative. So, those are the two ways that question could get on there. And yes, as we've seen from Tabor and a lot of other things in Colorado, in my opinion, it's a little too easy to get stuff on ballots. You can put anything you want on a ballot. So, yes, either a petition drive, which would be the initiative process, or council can put what they want on the ballot through a referral process.
Thank you. And we have about 5 more minutes and more questions than 5 minutes that we can allow. So we will be following up. Next online question is from Sarah Qualley. Where do legal costs, civil suit settlements, and HR severance payouts come from? What about when counselors sue each other, that kind of thing?
All general fund.
All right. Easy enough. All right, our next question from in person is Olivia Lundeen. Can special funds be raised, like for fireworks, the beach, etc., like a GoFundMe? Can we be creative in that way?
That's a great question, Olivia. But I think what it's going to do is illustrate a point that I'd like to make. when we do a fireworks show, it's about a $50,000 box of explosives, okay? But that's not all it takes to put the show on, all right? It takes Public Works to be there to make the streets safe, right? Transit. It takes the police to be there, okay, to guide traffic and keep people safe. Primarily, it falls on the rec department, our recreation department. And you have to have the people in place, the FTEs hired up to work that night, to set up, to break down. It's not just a question of, give me 50 grand for the box of fireworks. I also have to have the staffing level, the service level to support those kinds of functions. We don't have that service level anymore. So if someone would say, hey, here's 50 grand for the explosives, well, I'm going to say I don't have adequate staff to say, okay, you two are working, that night. It's more complex than that. I mean, you can even go further down the rabbit hole. If there's an accident, we need to have attorneys and insurance and risk. We have lowered our level of service because our revenue levels have gone down. And it's not as simple as, oh, here's a check for 50 grand, restore a service or an event, because they cost more than that. Plus, you already have to have the people on your roster to go out there and do the event. You can't just hire them up for the fireworks show and then say, okay, you're out. So it's a great question, but it's complicated in terms of putting those events on. It's not just the fireworks or just the beach. It's all the things, even the swim beach, right? We have to hire the lifeguards. We have to have, again, the risk control, lawyers and things for if something happens at the beach. It's a service level issue, not as simple as, it's just $50,000.
Thank you. And I think we have time for 2 more questions. All right, so the first one is Bill Talmud online. How is downtown redevelopment being funded?
These are great questions. You'll see right now, and like I said, you'll see construction projects throughout the town, for example, Hip Streets, right, on kind of that eastern portion of 4th Street. Well, thought we said the general fund was having problems. That's an expensive project. How's that happening? That's being funded by the Downtown Development Authority. And that is not a URA, but it's an authority that has a tax increment revenue source similar to what URAs have, and similar to URAs and similar to URAs and metros. That increment revenue that the DDA collects must be used for public improvements. So it's that same concept. Whenever we do these tax sharebacks, it's for public improvements. So how is Hip Streets being funded? That's a $12 million project. It's very expensive. It is not the general fund. It is, I should say the Hip Streets portion of it is not the general fund. It's our DDA fund and our partners at the DDA who have partnered with us to pay the debt service, because we borrowed the $12 million, to pay the debt service on that project. So again, great questions. And I as your CFO, I understand how when you're walking down the street, you're like, hey, wait a minute, you guys are telling me I got budget issues. And then I see all these big projects going up. It is complicated in that sense, but please, always send us the question, ask, these are great questions, ask us. I promise you, it'll make sense. I promise you the answer will make sense.
Thank you. And one more question, and then Kim's like, let's go. All right, last question. If the library became a county district library, would that reduce the City of Loveland's tax burden?
Well, no. If you're talking about it from the citizens' perspective, if the library were to have an inclusion election and become a library district, then the library could levy property tax and sales tax. And that would be how they got their revenue. So from the city's perspective as the organization, okay, now we don't have to fund the library. But you as the taxpayer would be paying that additional property tax for the library. So it would increase the tax burden on the citizens. But yeah, for the city, that would be a reduction in cost. But keep in mind, becoming a district's not simple. You would need your own payroll, your own HR department. You become your own entity, so your costs would probably go up. It's a solution, but it's a complicated solution that has a lot of varying factors to it.
Thank you. And with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Kim.
So for those of you who are in person, if you still have more questions to ask, please turn those in as you're leaving tonight. We're so appreciative of everybody who attended, both online and in person. We had incredible attendance this year, so we're certainly hoping that you learned something new today, that this was helpful, so that we can continue this narrative in our community, because we know this is important to you. And again, that's all the time that we have for tonight. Tomorrow you can tune into the rebroadcasts on our live stream at lovegov.org/TV to watch this on demand. And again, if you're in person, drop off those questions on your way out. If you're online, go ahead and we'll collect those questions on the chat. And thank you again for attending. We appreciate you.